The United States will allocate $12 billion to help Ukraine. The negotiators of the temporary spending bill in the U.S. Congress agreed to include this amount, in response to a request from the Biden administration. About it with reference to a source, reports Reuters. Thus, the U.S. Congress reached a preliminary agreement on the allocation of additional assistance to Ukraine in the amount of approximately $12 billion. The source, who asked not to be named, said the aid would also include funding for the resettlement of Afghan refugees. Earlier this month, U.S. President Joe Biden asked Congress to provide Ukraine with $11.7 billion in new emergency military and economic aid, he said. Reports the publication. As early as this Friday, the U.S. Congress will pass a bill on spending, which will include government programs. On May 9, the U.S. President signed the Lend-Lease Act for Ukraine. As part of this program, we will be able to get a lot of modern military equipment, which will bring our victory over the Russian Federation closer. Armament will be provided for rent, but it will be necessary to pay for it only after Ukraine wins. There is also an alternative. We can give the surviving equipment back to the United States. It is known that the United States has already allocated more than $25 billion to help Ukraine. In addition, American politicians are already working on a plan to support the Ukrainian army for years to come. Thus, in the United States they are creating a plan to support the armed forces of Ukraine in the medium and long term. In addition, support for Ukraine will be provided even after we defeat the enemy. Russian President Vladimir Putin may use tactical nuclear weapons, but so far there is no evidence that he is moving these weapons or preparing such a strike. The New York Times writes about it. According to representatives of the U.S. administration, Putin may use nuclear weapons during a demonstration explosion over the Black Sea, the Arctic Ocean, or in Ukraine. Experts believe that it is unlikely that the president of the Russian Federation will decide on this, given the reaction from the West and Moscow's allies, such as China and India. The latter voiced their harshest criticism of the use of nuclear weapons by the Russian dictator. Lithuania provided Ukraine with 100 units of M113 armored personnel carriers. Vilnius will continue to support the Ukrainian military. This was stated by the Minister of Defense of Lithuania, Arvydas Anušauskas. Regarding the military support of Ukraine, Lithuania has supported it and will continue to support it. Let me remind you that just 3 days ago our armored vehicles, which we sent, reached Ukraine, and now 50 M113 armored personnel carriers have been handed over to this country, the minister said. The head of the Ministry of Defense assured that Lithuania will continue to provide military assistance to Ukraine in the future. According to him, Vilnius discusses all supplies of equipment or other weapons with NATO allies. Our army is a NATO army, its combat capability is also important for our allies. As a result, every discussion, if it concerns the reduction of potential returns, we have to discuss how we will compensate, and what with the allies. There are many issues that cannot be resolved very quickly, Anušauskas explained. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky notes that the Russians felt they were losing and are trying to delay this moment. He said this in his video message. The situation is especially acute in the Donetsk region. We are doing everything to contain enemy activity. It is there that our number one goal is now, since Donbas is still the number one goal for the occupiers, the head of state said. He added that despite the obvious senselessness of the war for Russia and the loss of initiative by the invaders, the command of the Russian military still drives them to death. The constant attempts of the Russian offensive in the Donetsk region will certainly go down in the history of wars as one of the most cynical murders of their own soldiers. When we see this, when we see these offensives, we are once again convinced that Russian mobilization is a frank attempt to give commanders on the ground a constant stream of cannon meat, Zelensky said. The president added that there is simply no other meaning in Russian mobilization. They felt that they were losing, and they are simply trying to delay this moment, to ensure at least some activity at the front, to put at least someone with weapons in their hands instead of the dead, he said. At the same time, the head of state stressed, Russian society is not yet aware of all the cruelty of the Russian authorities towards their own people. But everything must be done so that every citizen of Russia admits that his own state is depriving him of the most important thing, the right to life, Zelensky summed up. The self-proclaimed president of Belarus Alexander Lukashenko said at a meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin that Russia and Belarus will not tolerate humiliation from Europe, although the future lies in cooperation. Meanwhile, Putin called on the West. Quote from Lukashenko, Europe, if it has become silent, I'm not talking about those overseas, let them think. I have already told them 3 times that their future is with us. Together with Russia, where they have everything they need. And they have things that we can buy from them. What else do they need? We just need to make responsible decisions. Details. In turn, Putin, commenting on Lukashenko's words, called on the West to respect Russia. Treat us, the Russian Federation, with respect, Putin said. It has been confirmed that Russian border guards at the Tyumen airport receive lists of conscripts from the military registration and enlistment offices and prohibit them from leaving the territory of the Russian Federation. Quote, the military registration and enlistment office provides the border department with a list of citizens who are prohibited from leaving. To cross the border, these categories of people need a document, permission to leave the military registration and enlistment office, obtained at the place of registration of a citizen. Details. This was reported to Portal 72 by the press service of the Rashino airport. Those whose names appear on the lists will need to have a document from the military registration and enlistment office when crossing the border. Earlier, the Bell, citing sources in the aviation industry, reported that some men from the lists provided by the military registration and enlistment offices were unable to leave the country from airports. Lists of individuals subject to military conscription were reportedly sent to border crossings at airports and are being used to screen men of military age, and some of them have not been allowed to leave. This is not about all those liable for military service, as reported, but about persons who have already been sent draft notices. A source at one of the Moscow airports said that 20 men of military age did not cross the border at his airport over the past 24 hours. A source at another airport said that the first restrictions, based on orders from the military registration and enlistment offices, began to appear on the night of September 23 to 24, and on Sunday, September 25, there were more of them.